The first mistake Derek Mallory made was thinking silence meant weakness. The second was choosing Caleb Whitaker as the man he wanted to embarrass in front of everyone. By noon, the cafeteria at Black Ridge Federal Penitentiary was already humming with the restless noise of 300 men packed beneath old fluorescent lights and steel rafters stained by years of heat, dust, and bad memories. Plastic trays slid across metal rails. Boots scraped the floor. Somewhere near the back, a guard called out a warning that nobody really heard. Then Caleb walked in. He was the new inmate, a black man in his mid-50s with short gray hair, tired eyes, and the kind of calm that did not belong in a place built to break people. His orange uniform hung loose on his frame, and the intake band around his wrist still looked too clean, too new, too easy to notice. He did not search the room for friends. He did not stare down enemies. He simply moved forward with his tray held steady in both hands, as if the noise around him were weather, and weather was something a man endured without complaint. That was what caught Derek's attention. Derek sat at the center table like it was a throne, a broad-shouldered white inmate with pale eyes, a shaved head, and a reputation that made younger prisoners lower their voices when he passed. Around him sat the men who laughed when he laughed and stood when he stood. In Block C, Derek did not need a crown. Fear had done the job for him. He watched Caleb cross the room, watched the old man's careful steps, watched the way nobody claimed him, and a slow smile spread across his face. Fresh meat, someone muttered beside him. Derek did not answer. He stood, and the conversations nearest him began to die. One table went quiet, then another, until the silence moved across the cafeteria like a shadow. Caleb kept walking. Derek stepped into his path. The two men stood only a few feet apart, but they looked like they belonged to different worlds, one loud, heavy, and eager to be seen, the other still, measured, and almost forgotten by the room. Derek looked Caleb up and down, then glanced at the tray in his hands. "You lost, old man?" he asked, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Caleb lifted his eyes slowly. No anger. No fear. Just a steady look that made the moment feel colder than it should have. "I am just trying to eat," Caleb said. A few inmates shifted in their seats. Derek's smile widened, but something behind it tightened. "Around here, old man, legends do not survive. They get stepped on." Then he reached out and knocked Caleb's tray from his hands. The food spilled across the floor, the plastic cup rolled under a table, and every man in the cafeteria waited for the new inmate to do what new inmates always did, beg, freeze, or make the kind of mistake that followed them for years. Caleb did none of those things. He lowered himself slowly, picked up the broken spoon, and placed it back on the tray like it still mattered. His hands did not shake. Not even once. Every man in that cafeteria understood what was supposed to happen next. A new inmate on his first day was supposed to learn the shape of the place. He was supposed to look down, swallow his pride, and let men like Derek Mallory decide how much of his dignity he was allowed to keep. That was how Block C worked. That was how Black Ridge Federal Penitentiary kept its unofficial order beneath the hum of fluorescent lights and the watchful eyes of tired correctional officers. But Caleb Whitaker did not move like a man being taught a lesson. He moved like a man who had already survived lessons far worse than this one. He picked up the tray with slow, careful hands, set the broken spoon beside the napkin, and rose to his full height without rushing. He was not tall, not compared to Derek. He was lean, quiet, and gray at the edges, the kind of man most people would pass on the street without remembering 5 seconds later. Yet something about the way he stood made the laughter in the room feel unsafe. Derek noticed at first, even if he would never admit it. Caleb was not challenging him. That was the strange part. There was no clenched jaw, no raised voice, no desperate attempt to save face. Caleb simply looked at him with a patience that felt older than the prison itself. For a moment, the only sound was the plastic cup rolling in a slow circle under the nearest table. Then Derek leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to make the words feel personal. You think you are too good to be scared? Caleb looked past him for half a second, not at Derek's crew, not at the guards, but at the ceiling corner where an old camera blinked with a tiny red light. Then his eyes returned to Derek. Fear is useful, he said. Panic is not. The words were soft, but they traveled. Men at two nearby tables heard them and stopped pretending not to listen. Marcus Reed, a young inmate with nervous eyes and a fresh bruise of shame on his pride from weeks of being pushed around, stared at Caleb as if he had just seen someone open a locked door without a key. Derek's smile faded by a fraction. He did not like clever answers. He liked begging. He liked anger. He liked the kind of reaction that gave him permission to make the room smaller around somebody. Caleb gave him none of that. From the guard station near the cafeteria entrance, Officer Raymond Cole turned his head. He had been working Blackridge for 17 years, long enough to know the difference between a man trying to act calm and a man who was calm all the way down to the bone. Caleb Whitaker was the second kind. Cole had seen soldiers like that once, back when he was young, before the uniform on his back was gray instead of green. Men who could stand in the middle of chaos and make the chaos seem embarrassed. He narrowed his eyes as Caleb bent again, not to submit, but to retrieve the last piece of bread from the floor and place it on the tray with quiet precision. Something about the movement bothered him. Not because it was strange, but because it was familiar. Across the cafeteria, Derek felt the room slipping away from him. The silence was no longer his weapon. It had become Caleb's. So he laughed louder than he needed to, turned toward his crew, and spread his arms as if the whole thing were a joke. Look at this, he said. The old man thinks he is a philosopher. A few of his men laughed, but it came late and thin. Caleb stepped around Derek, not fast, not afraid, just done with the conversation. That small act, that simple refusal to remain trapped in Derek's performance, changed the temperature of the room. Derek's face hardened. Caleb had not raised a hand. He had not thrown a threat. He had done something worse in front of everyone. He had made Derek Mallory look unnecessary. As Caleb walked toward an empty table near the wall, Marcus Reed lowered his eyes and whispered, "You should not have done that." Caleb sat down, placed the tray in front of him, and looked at the young man with the same steady calm. Done what? Marcus swallowed. Made him feel small. Caleb glanced across the room, where Derek was still standing, still smiling, still pretending he was in control. Then Caleb picked up the broken spoon and said, "Some men spend their whole lives feeling small. They just make other people pay for it." Blackridge Federal Penitentiary had a way of making every man feel smaller by design. The building sat 4 miles outside a forgotten county road in northern Georgia, surrounded by pine woods, chain-link fences, and guard towers that watched the horizon like tired eyes. In summer, the heat pressed down on the concrete until the walls seemed to breathe it back at night. In winter, the cold came through the metal doors and settled into the bones. Nothing about Blackridge was accidental. The narrow corridors forced men to pass close enough to feel each other's anger. The cafeteria tables were bolted to the floor so nobody could move them. The lights never truly turned off, not even after midnight, because darkness gave men privacy, and privacy was something the prison did not believe they deserved. Block C was the worst of it, not because it held the most dangerous inmates on paper, but because it had learned how to govern itself in the spaces where official rules grew weak. The officers had schedules, cameras, reports, and keys. Derek Mallory had something older than all of that. He had fear. For 3 years, Derek had controlled the rhythm of Block C like a man conducting a song nobody wanted to hear. He decided who sat where, who used the phones first, who got left alone, and who became a warning. He did not always need to raise his voice. Sometimes a look was enough. Sometimes one of his men leaning against a doorway was enough. By the time Caleb Whitaker arrived, most inmates had accepted Derek's power as part of the building, like the rust on the bars or the stale smell of disinfectant in the morning. That was why Caleb's quiet refusal in the cafeteria did not feel small. It felt dangerous in a way nobody could explain. After lunch, the men of Block C returned through the corridor in 2 slow lines, their shoes dragging against the polished concrete. Caleb walked near the middle, hands at his sides, eyes forward. Marcus Reed stayed half a step behind him, not because Caleb told him to, but because being near the older man somehow made the air easier to breathe. Derek watched from the back of the line. He was laughing with his crew, but his eyes were not laughing. They stayed fixed on Caleb's shoulders, on the calm way he moved, on the fact that not once did the new inmate turn around to check if trouble was following him. That bothered Derek more than any insult could have. A frightened man looked over his shoulder. A proud man looked back to challenge. Caleb did neither. He walked like a man who already knew where every threat in the corridor stood. When they reached the cell block, the heavy door released with a deep mechanical buzz, and the line filtered inside. Block C opened into 3 tiers of metal walkways, stacked under a high ceiling crossed by pipes and old wiring. Voices bounced upward and came back distorted. A television played somewhere in the common area, its volume too low to understand. Caleb paused just inside the entrance, not long enough for most men to notice, but long enough for Officer Raymond Cole to notice everything. Caleb's eyes moved once across the upper rail, once toward the emergency exit, once toward the blind corner near the laundry hall, and once toward the guard station window. It was not curiosity. It was assessment. Cole felt a memory stir in the back of his mind, a dusty memory from a desert base half a lifetime ago, when an older sergeant had told him that real professionals never entered a room without leaving themselves a way out. Caleb continued to his assigned cell on the lower tier, number 47, and set his small bundle on the bunk. Marcus stood in the doorway, uncertain whether he had been invited or whether he was making another mistake. Caleb looked at him and nodded toward the empty chair. Marcus sat. For a while, neither man spoke. Outside the cell, Block C resumed its normal noise, but under that noise was a new question moving from bunk to bunk, from whisper to whisper. Who was the old man who did not flinch when Derek Mallory tried to break him? Marcus finally leaned forward and said, "You do not know this place yet." Caleb folded his blanket with careful edges and placed it at the foot of the bed. "I know places like this," he said. Marcus shook his head. "Not like this. Derek runs everything." Caleb looked at the young man for a long moment, not with judgment, but with something closer to sadness. "No man runs everything," he said. "Some men only stand where others have stopped pushing back." Outside the cell, Derek Mallory appeared at the far end of the tier, walking slowly, smiling again, surrounded by his crew. The afternoon had not ended. It had only chosen its next stage. Caleb Whitaker had been in Blackridge for less than 6 hours, but by late afternoon, the prison had already begun trying to understand him. That was what places like Blackridge did to new men. They measured them, labeled them, and decided where to place them in the invisible order of survival. Loud men were marked as problems. Nervous men were marked as easy. Proud men were marked as future examples. Caleb did not fit any of those boxes. He sat on the lower bunk in cell 47 with his back against the wall, his hands resting loosely on his knees, and his eyes half closed as if the entire block were no more troubling than distant traffic outside an apartment window. Marcus Reed sat across from him, still unsure what to make of the old man who had walked through Derek Mallory's public test without bending. Marcus had seen new inmates arrive before. Some tried to make friends too fast. Some talked too much about what they had done on the outside. Some spent their first day staring at the floor, already counting the years ahead like stones in their pockets. Caleb had done none of that. He had studied the room, studied the men, studied the sounds between the sounds, and then he had become still. Marcus kept glancing at the intake folder tucked near the cell bars, where a guard had left a copy of Caleb's basic housing information. Caleb Whitaker, age 54. Born in Alabama. Prior occupation listed as freight driver. Conviction listed in plain language that made him seem ordinary, almost forgettable. But Marcus had learned that paperwork in prison told only the part of a man the system wanted other people to see. It did not explain why Caleb folded his blanket with the exact corners of a man who had spent years under inspection. It did not explain why his shoes were placed facing the door, heels aligned, laces tucked. It did not explain why he had chosen the lower bunk only after noticing that the small metal mirror on the opposite wall reflected the corridor outside. Those were not habits of a freight driver. Those were habits of someone who had lived where seconds mattered. Outside the cell, Derek Mallory's voice rolled through the block, casual and loud, carrying just enough humor to make his anger sound harmless to anyone who did not know better. Caleb did not open his eyes. Marcus did. "You hear him?" Marcus asked. Caleb answered without moving. "I hear everything." That response should have sounded arrogant, but it did not. It sounded like a fact. Marcus leaned back, rubbing his palms against his pants. "Why did they send you here?" Caleb's eyes opened then, slowly. For the first time, Marcus saw something pass behind them, not fear, not regret, but a memory so heavy it seemed to enter the cell with them. "The official answer is because a judge signed a paper," Caleb said. Marcus waited. "And the unofficial answer?" Caleb looked toward the corridor, where Officer Raymond Cole was passing by with a clipboard. Cole slowed for one fraction of a second when Caleb turned his head, and in that fraction, both men seemed to recognize something they were not ready to name. "The unofficial answer," Caleb said, "is usually the one that gets people hurt." Marcus looked away first. He did not know why that sentence made the air feel colder. Caleb stood and began organizing the few items he had been given: one towel, one bar of soap, one thin blanket, one paperback Bible left behind by a previous inmate, and a pencil no longer than his thumb. He moved with quiet efficiency, giving every object a place. Marcus watched him place the pencil near the edge of the small desk, exactly parallel to the wall. "You always this calm?" Marcus asked. Caleb almost smiled. "Calm is not something you are," he said. "It is something you practice when everything around you wants permission to control you." Marcus did not answer. He was still turning those words over when Derek appeared outside the cell, filling the doorway with his shadow and that same easy smile he wore when he wanted witnesses. Behind him stood two of his men, silent, watching. Derek looked around the cell, then at Marcus, then finally at Caleb. "Making friends already?" he asked. Caleb turned from the desk, slow and unbothered. Derek stepped 1 inch closer to the threshold, careful not to enter yet, careful to make the moment stretch. The whole lower tier had gone quiet again. Caleb did not ask what he wanted. He already knew. Derek had lost something in the cafeteria, and men like Derek always came back to collect what pride told them was owed. Derek Mallory had built his name in Blackridge the way some men built walls, one brick of fear at a time. Before prison, he had been just another angry man from a small town outside Chattanooga, someone who blamed the world for every door that closed in front of him. Inside Blackridge, anger became currency. Size became reputation. A loud voice became a weapon. By the end of his first year, Derek had learned that men did not have to respect him if they were afraid to ignore him. By the end of his second year, he had gathered a crew. By the third, Block C had stopped asking who was in charge. Everyone knew. He controlled the phones by standing near them. He controlled the best seats in the cafeteria by sitting in the middle. He controlled the mood of the tier by deciding when a joke was funny and when silence meant trouble. Officers wrote reports. Wardens gave speeches. But after lights dimmed and the doors locked, men listened for Derek's footsteps. That was the truth of Block C, and that was why Caleb Whitaker's arrival had disturbed something deeper than pride. Caleb had not challenged Derek's authority. He had done something worse. He had treated it like weather passing over him. Now Derek stood outside cell 47, smiling into the quiet, with two of his men behind him and half the tier pretending not to watch. Marcus Reed sat frozen on the chair, his shoulders tight, his eyes moving between Derek and Caleb like a man standing too close to a storm. Caleb remained near the desk, one hand resting lightly beside the short pencil, his expression calm enough to make the silence uncomfortable. Derek looked at Marcus first. "You moving up in the world now, Reed? Got yourself a grandpa bodyguard?" A few men on the tier gave small, nervous laughs. Marcus lowered his eyes, but Caleb did not. Derek turned his attention back to the older man. "You embarrassed me at lunch," he said. Caleb's voice stayed even. "I ate lunch. That was all." Derek's smile thinned. "No, you made people look. Around here, when people look at me the wrong way, I correct it." Caleb studied him for a moment, not with fear, not with anger, but with a kind of tired understanding that made Derek's face harden. "You want respect," Caleb said. Derek stepped closer to the bars. "I have respect." Caleb shook his head once. "No. You have compliance. The difference is what keeps you awake." The words landed softly, but every man close enough to hear them felt the weight. Derek's jaw moved as if he were chewing on something bitter. He glanced at his crew, then back at Caleb, knowing he could not let the sentence live in the air without answering it. So he reached past the doorway and picked up Caleb's towel from the bunk, holding it between two fingers like it was trash. "New rule," he said. "You want to stay in this block, you ask before you use anything. Bunk, sink, shower, air." Caleb looked at the towel, then at Derek's hand. "Put it back," he said. The tier went still. Even Officer Cole, standing at the far end with his clipboard, stopped walking. Derek laughed, but the laugh had no warmth in it. "What did you say?" Caleb took one slow step forward. "Put it back while this is still just a conversation." Marcus closed his eyes for a second, as if he could feel the future tightening around them. Derek held Caleb's stare, waiting for the old man to blink, to soften, to give him the opening he needed. Caleb gave him nothing. No threat. No movement toward the door. No fear. Just that steady presence, quiet as a locked room. Derek finally tossed the towel back onto the bunk, not because he wanted to obey, but because he realized too many men were watching the wrong kind of silence form around Caleb Whitaker. He pointed at Marcus next. "This is not over." Then he looked at Caleb and lowered his voice. "Tonight, old man, you learn how Block C really works." Derek walked away with his crew trailing behind him, but the damage had already been done. For the first time in years, men on the tier had seen Derek Mallory step back without getting what he came for. And in Blackridge, that kind of thing did not stay quiet. It traveled faster than footsteps, faster than rumors, faster than fear. By dinner, every man in Block C would know that the new inmate in cell 47 had drawn a line. By nightfall, Derek would feel forced to cross it. By the time dinner trays were collected and the last strip of daylight disappeared behind the narrow windows of Block C, the air had changed. It was not louder. It was not quieter. It was heavier. Men moved with the careful awareness of people who knew a rule had been broken but did not yet know who would pay for it. Derek Mallory sat at the far end of the common area with his crew around him, pretending to play cards, pretending to laugh, pretending that Caleb Whitaker had not become the only subject that mattered. Across the tier, Caleb sat at the small metal table outside cell 47, reading the worn paperback Bible left behind by another inmate. He did not turn pages quickly. He did not scan the room in obvious fear. But nothing around him escaped notice. The reflection in the television screen showed Derek's table. The sound of boots on the upper walkway told him when someone paused too long above his cell. The silence near the laundry hallway told him where the nervous men had gathered to watch from a safe distance. Marcus Reed sat nearby, unable to keep still. His knee bounced under the table, his fingers tapped against his cup, and every few seconds his eyes drifted toward Derek. Caleb finally closed the book. "You are making fear louder than it needs to be," he said. Marcus swallowed. "You do not understand. When Derek says tonight, he means tonight." Caleb placed the book flat on the table. "Then tonight will come." That answer did nothing to comfort Marcus. It seemed to comfort everyone else even less. A few cells down, men who had spent years avoiding Derek now watched Caleb with a mixture of hope and dread, as if the old man had unknowingly accepted a burden that belonged to all of them. Officer Raymond Cole noticed it from the guard station. He had seen tension before. He had seen arguments grow legs and walk through a block until everyone could feel them coming. But this was different. Derek was used to men reacting. Caleb was making him wait. That kind of waiting could drive a bully into proving something he should have left alone. At 7:45, the television volume dropped without anyone touching the remote. Derek had stood up. His crew rose with him, 5 men moving like they had rehearsed the moment in their heads all afternoon. They did not rush. Rushing would have made them look uncertain. They crossed the common area slowly, spreading out just enough to make the room feel smaller. Marcus saw them coming and stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. Caleb did not stand. Derek stopped beside the table and looked down at the closed book. "You praying now?" he asked. Caleb looked up. "Not for me." A thin smile moved across Derek's face. "You got jokes?" "No," Caleb said. "Just priorities." The men behind Derek shifted, and the common area tightened into silence. Derek reached toward Marcus, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the lazy confidence of a man who believed everyone would allow it. Marcus stepped back, but the wall stopped him. Derek looked at Caleb while pointing at the younger inmate. "Here is how this works. He apologizes for sitting with you. Then you apologize. For lunch. Then maybe we all sleep easy." Caleb's eyes moved to Marcus. "Do not apologize for sitting in a chair," he said. Derek's face changed. The smile vanished, leaving only the need to be obeyed. He leaned closer to Marcus, lowering his voice into something colder. "Say it." Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Caleb stood then. Slowly. Not to impress anyone. Not to threaten. Simply because the line had moved from insult to fear, and he would not let a frightened young man carry it alone. The difference in the room was immediate. Derek was still bigger. His crew was still there. The block was still his, at least on paper. But when Caleb stood, the space around him seemed to settle. Even the men on the upper tier stopped breathing loudly. Caleb took one step, placing himself between Derek and Marcus. "You can walk away," he said. Derek let out a short laugh, but it sounded forced. "And if I do not?" Caleb held his gaze. "Then tomorrow morning, every man here will remember that you were warned with respect." No one moved. Officer Cole's hand hovered near the radio at his shoulder. Derek's crew looked to him, waiting for the signal that would restore the old order. But Derek had begun to understand something he hated. Caleb was not trying to win the room. He already had its attention, and attention was the first thing Derek had ever truly owned. Losing it felt like losing ground beneath his feet. He pointed toward the laundry hallway. "You and me, old man. Away from the cameras." Caleb looked toward the hallway, then at the small red light above the guard station, then back at Derek. "You chose a place before you chose a reason," he said. "That means you are not angry. You are planning." The word struck harder than shouting could have. For 1 second, Derek looked exposed. Then his pride covered the wound. 10 minutes, he said. "If you do not show, Marcus pays your debt." Caleb's expression did not change, but his voice dropped lower. "Touch the boy again, and you will spend a long time wishing you had stayed loud instead of foolish." Derek turned and walked away before the silence could answer for him. His crew followed, but not with the same confidence. Marcus stared at Caleb, pale with fear. "You cannot go in there," he whispered. Caleb picked up the book, tucked it under his arm, and looked toward the laundry hallway where the lights flickered above the blind corner. "I am not going because he called me," Caleb said. "I am going because men like him keep choosing rooms where nobody is supposed to see the truth." The laundry hallway at Blackridge was not hidden, but it had always felt that way. It branched off from the lower tier between the showers and the storage room, bending just enough that the main camera saw only the entrance and not what waited beyond it. The men in Block C knew that corner. They knew the flicker of the light above the dryers, the groan of the old pipes, the hollow sound the floor made when too many feet gathered there at once. It was the kind of place where stories began with someone being called in and ended with everyone pretending they had heard nothing. Caleb Whitaker walked toward it without hurry, the worn paperback Bible still tucked under his arm. Marcus followed 2 steps behind until Caleb stopped and looked back. "Stay where people can see you," Caleb said. Marcus shook his head, his voice low. "I cannot let you go alone." Caleb's expression softened by the smallest degree. "Courage is not standing in every storm," he said. "Sometimes it is staying alive long enough to tell the truth about it." Marcus wanted to argue, but the words failed him. Officer Raymond Cole watched from the guard station, one hand resting near his radio, his eyes following Caleb with growing concern. He had seen men walk toward trouble before. They usually carried anger in their shoulders or fear in their hands. Caleb carried neither. At the entrance to the laundry hallway, Caleb paused and did something so small most of the block missed it. He tapped 3 fingers twice against the metal doorframe, then once with his thumb. Cole went completely still. The sound was soft, almost swallowed by the hum of the lights, but it reached something buried deep in his memory. 3 taps. 1 pause. 1 tap. It was not random. It was a field signal, old and simple, used when radios were too dangerous and voices could get men killed. Cole had learned it 22 years ago on a training base in North Carolina, from a master sergeant who told every young soldier the same thing: "If you ever meet a man who uses this without thinking, pay attention, because he has been places that do not make it into reports." Cole's mouth went dry. He looked at Caleb's file again, the public version clipped to his board. Freight driver. Convicted civilian. No military record listed. No special classification. Nothing that explained the way he entered rooms, counted exits, and turned silence into cover. But Cole knew what he had just heard. And suddenly, the name Caleb Whitaker felt less like a name and more like a door someone had locked from the inside. Down the hall, Derek Mallory waited near the laundry machines with his crew spread around him. They had chosen their positions badly, though none of them knew it. One man stood too close to a rolling cart. Another blocked his own path with a laundry bin. Derek stood beneath the flickering light, trying to look patient, trying to look amused, but his jaw told the truth. He was angry because the room had started measuring him against someone he could not read. Caleb stepped into the laundry area and placed the Bible on top of a folded stack of towels. Derek looked at it and laughed under his breath. "You brought a book." Caleb glanced around once, taking in the space, the exits, the distance between bodies, the camera blind spot, the slick patch of water near the floor drain. Then he looked back at Derek. "I brought a reminder," he said. Derek frowned. "Of what?" Caleb's voice stayed quiet. "That every man gets a chance to turn back before pride finishes speaking for him." The word settled between them, and for the first time since Caleb arrived at Blackridge, Derek did not answer right away. Outside the hallway, Cole lifted his radio but did not press the button. Not yet. His mind was racing through old stories from overseas, stories about a black special operations commander whose team called him Ghost because by the time danger noticed him, it was already too late. Cole had never met that man. Most people said the legend was exaggerated. Some said he had died years ago. But as Caleb stood under the flickering laundry light, calm in a room built for intimidation, Cole felt the past reach forward and touch the present. Derek finally stepped closer, forcing a smile back onto his face. "You think you scare me?" Caleb looked at him with something almost like pity. "No," he said. "That is the problem. You are still mistaking warning for fear." Behind Derek, one of his men shifted, suddenly less certain than he had been a minute before. The washing machines hummed. The light flickered. And somewhere outside the blind corner, Officer Cole whispered a name he had not heard spoken in more than 2 decades. Ghost. For a moment, nothing happened, and that was what made the laundry room feel smaller. Derek Mallory had expected Caleb Whitaker to raise his voice, square his shoulders, or give him the kind of reaction that could be used as permission. Instead, Caleb stood beside the folded towels with his hands relaxed at his sides, his eyes steady, his breathing slow enough to make the humming machine seem impatient. Derek looked at his crew, then back at Caleb, because every second of waiting made the old order feel weaker. "You really think that calm act means something?" Derek asked. Caleb did not answer right away. His gaze moved once to the wet patch near the floor drain, once to the rolling cart, once to the narrow gap between 2 washers, and then back to Derek's face. "It means I am still giving you time," he said. That sentence did what a shout could not. It made Derek step forward before his pride allowed him to think. His crew moved with him, not with confidence now, but with obligation. They had followed Derek too long to stop in front of witnesses. One man tried to circle left, but Caleb shifted half a step, and suddenly the man found himself blocked by the laundry cart he had ignored. Another moved too quickly near the wet floor and had to catch himself against a dryer, losing the hard look he had been wearing. Caleb had not touched anyone. He had simply moved where the room needed him to move, as if he had seen the next 10 seconds before they arrived. Derek noticed it, and the realization embarrassed him more than fear ever could. Outside the hallway, Officer Cole pressed the radio at his shoulder. "Laundry corridor," he said, voice controlled. "I need staff on the lower tier. Now." Inside the room, Derek reached for Caleb's sleeve, but Caleb turned his wrist away with such small precision that Derek's hand closed on empty air. The motion was almost invisible, but its effect was enormous. Derek froze for half a breath, staring at his own hand like it had betrayed him. Caleb leaned closer, not threatening, not cruel, just clear. "Last chance," he said. "Walk out with your pride bruised, or stay and let everyone see what pride costs." Derek's face tightened. He could hear men gathering near the hallway entrance. He could feel his crew waiting for him to restore the story they had all lived under for years. So he pushed forward, and the room seemed to slow around Caleb. One step. One turn. One quiet redirection of force. Derek stumbled past him and caught himself against the washer, more shocked than hurt. Another man moved in, and Caleb guided him aside with a firm grip at the forearm, placing him against the wall as gently as a teacher correcting a student's posture. The third stopped on his own, suddenly aware that he did not understand the lesson being taught. No one screamed. No one crashed through machines. There was only the squeak of shoes, the buzz of the old light, and the growing silence of men realizing that power did not always announce itself with noise. Derek tried again, breathing hard now, anger turning into confusion. Caleb stepped inside the movement, lowered his center of gravity, and with one controlled turn, brought Derek down to one knee without striking him. The entire room went still. Derek looked up, stunned, his hand held safely in Caleb's grip, unable to move forward and too proud to ask what had just happened. Caleb's voice was calm enough for everyone to hear. "I told you this could stay a conversation." At that exact moment, Officer Cole entered with 2 correctional officers behind him. Their hands went to their radios, but then they stopped. 7 men stood scattered around the laundry room, breathing hard, shaken, but safe. Caleb stood in the center without a mark of Panic on his face. The Bible still rested on the folded towels. The light flickered above him, and for one long second, nobody spoke. Cole looked at Derek, then at Caleb, then at the careful positions of every man in the room. This had not been a fight. It had been control. Derek's crew understood it. The inmates at the hallway understood it. And Derek, still on one knee beneath the buzzing light, understood it most of all. Caleb Whitaker had not come to Blackridge looking for a throne. But in less than 1 minute, he had taken away the only thing Derek Mallory had ever truly ruled, the belief that everyone had to be afraid of him. By the time the correctional officers escorted Derek Mallory and his crew out of the laundry corridor, Block C was no longer the same place. Nothing visible had changed. The same metal stairs climbed to the upper tier. The same television flickered in the common area. The same doors waited to close at the end of the night. But every man there could feel the shift. It moved through the block without needing a single word. Derek walked with his eyes down, not because he had been seriously harmed, but because something more important had been taken from him in front of witnesses. His certainty was gone. The myth around him had cracked. And in a prison like Blackridge, a cracked myth could never be made whole again. Caleb Whitaker returned to cell 47 without celebration. He did not smile. He did not accept the silent looks of respect that followed him from the hallway. He simply picked up the worn Bible from the folded towels, carried it back to his cell, and placed it on the desk exactly where it had been before. Marcus Reed stood near the bars, staring at him like he was trying to understand how one quiet man had done what years of fear had told everyone was impossible. Caleb sat on the lower bunk and looked at him. "You are still breathing like you expect the room to fall on you," he said. Marcus let out a nervous laugh that was almost not a laugh at all. "Maybe I do." Caleb nodded once, as if that made sense. "Fear takes time to leave after it has paid rent in your chest." Marcus looked toward the tier. Where men who had avoided his eyes for weeks now looked at him differently, not with pity, but with recognition. "What happens now?" he asked. Caleb leaned back against the wall. "Now men decide whether they want a different kind of quiet." Across the block, Officer Raymond Cole stood at the guard station with Caleb's file open in front of him and a question pressing hard behind his ribs. The public paperwork still said freight driver. Civilian conviction. Standard custody. But Cole no longer believed any of it. At 9:30 that night, he walked the file to Warden Patricia Haynes, a woman who had run Blackridge long enough to know when a small incident was not small at all. She listened without interrupting as Cole described the cafeteria, the cell block, the field signal, and the way Caleb had ended the laundry corridor standoff without turning it into chaos. When Cole said the old nickname, Ghost, Warden Haynes's expression changed. "Not much. Just enough." She opened a locked cabinet behind her desk and removed a sealed folder with no prison number on the tab. Inside were pages Cole had no clearance to read, but he saw enough before she closed it: Special Operations, Classified Deployment, Rescue Team, Sealed Testimony, Federal Transfer Approved. Warden Haynes looked through the office window toward Block C. "Caleb Whitaker was not sent here by accident," she said quietly. Cole felt the words settle like cold water. Back in cell 47, Caleb sat awake long after lights dimmed. Marcus had finally fallen asleep, but Caleb's eyes remained open, fixed on the reflection in the small metal mirror across from his bunk. At the far end of the lower tier, an older inmate stepped out of the shadows near cell 62. White hair. Narrow shoulders. A face most men ignored because prison had taught them to overlook anyone who looked finished. But Caleb did not overlook him. The man turned his head, and for one brief second, their eyes met in the mirror. The old inmate's face lost all color. Caleb did not move. He did not need to. 20 years had passed since the night his team was betrayed. 20 years since 12 good soldiers walked into a mission that should have brought them home and instead buried their names under classified ink. The world believed Caleb Whitaker had disappeared into disgrace. The military buried Ghost because it was easier than admitting someone had sold him out. Now the man at the end of Block C had heard the nickname again, and fear had found the right address. Caleb reached for the short pencil on his desk and wrote one line on the inside cover of the Bible. Found him. Then he closed the book.